The darkness before dawn carries its own particular weight at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. It's a silence that feels earned, bought, and paid for by generations of warriors who learned their deadly craft on these windswept beaches. At 0400 hours, when most of the world still dreams, the shooting range stands empty, almost empty. The crack of a suppressed rifle splits the pre-dawn quiet. 500 yards downrange, a target's head section disintegrates. Then another, and another. 20 consecutive headshots, each one placed with surgical precision, each one delivered in the kind of darkness that would send most shooters home defeated. The shooter doesn't pause to admire the work. There's no fist pump, no celebration, no acknowledgement of the inhuman accuracy on display. There's only the mechanical rhythm of loading, breathing, and killing paper targets with the same cold efficiency that in other places under other circumstances has ended the lives of 47 human beings. Senior Chief Petty Officer Bryn Kessler moves like water through the loading sequence. Her hands know the Mk-11 sniper rifle better than most people know their own family. Every surface, every angle, every pressure point. The weapon is an extension of her nervous system, responding to intention before conscious thought can catch up. In the pale green glow of the range's safety lights, her face remains utterly impassive. No strain, no effort. Just the absolute concentration of someone who has reduced violence to a science, and in that science has found a kind of terrible peace. She's 28 years old, though her eyes carry decades more weight than her birth certificate would suggest. 5'6", 135 pounds of lean muscle and coil potential energy. Her dark hair is pulled back in the severe regulation bun that makes her face seem harder than it is, all angles and sharp edges in the dim light. But it's her hands that tell the real story. Scarred, calloused, steady as a surgeon's, they move through the reloading sequence with the kind of fluidity that only comes from 10,000 repetitions, maybe 20,000, maybe more. The rifle comes up again. Breath in, slow and controlled. Breath out, even slower. Heart rate drops, 58 beats per minute. The world narrows to a single point 600 yards away. Pressure on the trigger smooth and constant, 4.5 pounds of force applied with such gradual precision that the break comes as a surprise even to her. The rifle barks. The suppressor turns the violent explosion into a polite cough. Downrange, another target dies. This is meditation for Bryn Kessler. This is prayer. Her mind drifts as her body executes the familiar ritual. The rifle in her hands is nearly identical to the M40A1 her grandfather used to teach her with back when she was 14 years old, and already knew she wanted to be something most people thought was impossible. The memory surfaces unbidden, as it often does in these quiet hours. His voice rough as gravel from a lifetime of cigarettes and salt air. Silence is the sniper's hymn, kid. Your bullets should speak louder than you ever do. She was loading magazines left-handed, even then a quirk he'd taught her, because ambidexterity might save her life someday. It had. Twice. Once in Helmand province when her right shoulder took shrapnel, and once in Syria when a compound fracture of her right wrist hadn't stopped her from completing a mission that depended on her particular skills. She'd fired 73 rounds left-handed that night, achieving a 94% hit rate, despite the pain that had her vomiting between shots. The mission succeeded. That was all that mattered. That was all that ever mattered. The magazine clicks into place. The bolt slides forward with mechanical certainty. Another target awaits its execution. Bryn's locker sits open against the range house wall, and in the dim light, 2 photographs are visible inside. The first shows a young man in his late 20s, red-haired and grinning, his face split by the kind of smile that belongs to someone who genuinely loves life. Petty Officer First Class Finn Gallagher, call sign Reaper, killed in action 18 months ago in Afghanistan, taking a sniper's bullet that was meant for her. The photo is worn at the edges from being held too many times, and on the back, in Finn's surprisingly elegant handwriting, is a message she knows by heart. Ghost, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't carry me. Carry the mission. That's the job. Reaper. The second photograph is older, the colors faded to that distinctive palette of 1980s Kodak film. 2 young men in combat gear, faces streaked with camouflage paint in something that might be blood, sit against a concrete wall somewhere hot and foreign. One is barely 18, baby-faced despite the 1,000-yard stare. The other is in his early 30s, harder weathered with the confident posture of someone who's seen combat and walked away from it enough times to believe in his own immortality. The younger one is Master Chief Wyatt Drummond, though he's just a scared kid in this photo, fresh off the boat in Grenada in 1983. The older one is Senior Chief Dalton Flint Kessler, Bryn's grandfather, the man who raised her after her parents died, who turned grief into purpose and a confused 12-year-old girl into a weapon. He's been dead 8 years now. Heart attack at 65, his body finally calling in the debt from decades of stress and violence and carrying the weight of things that can never be spoken aloud. She'd been 20 already through Bojas, already proving to a skeptical Navy that some weapons come in unexpected packages. He'd lived just long enough to see her make it through Hell Week, to see her earn the trident she now wears with such quiet ferocity. His last words to her, delivered from a hospital bed with tubes running in and out of him like some awful science experiment. "You're better than I ever was, kid. Make sure they know it." She spent 8 years making sure they know it. 47 confirmed kills, 8 combat deployments across 4 countries, a Navy Cross that sits in a box at the bottom of her wall locker because displaying it feels too much like bragging, and her grandfather taught her that competence speaks for itself. 3 Bronze Stars with the V device for valor, because apparently doing your job under fire counts as heroism in the modern military. A Purple Heart from the time an IED in Mosul turned her Humvee into a rolling fireball, and she'd crawled out with second-degree burns to pull her driver to safety before the ammunition cooked off. The list goes on. It always goes on. But none of it shows on her face as she breaks down the rifle with the same methodical precision she brings to everything. Clean, inspect, oil, reassemble, function check, store. The ritual matters. The details matter. Everything matters or nothing does. The sun begins its slow climb over the eastern horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would be beautiful if Bryn had the capacity to notice such things anymore. She doesn't. Beauty is a luxury that got burned out of her somewhere between her 3rd and 4th deployment in a village whose name she can't remember but whose screams she'll never forget. Now there's just the mission, the job, the endless grinding work of being better than everyone thinks you can be just to be treated as barely adequate. She secures her gear and begins the long walk back toward the main compound. Her stride is economical balance, the walk of someone who's covered thousands of miles on foot with a 70-pound ruck on her back. Every movement serves a purpose. There's no wasted energy, no unnecessary motion. Efficiency is survival. Her grandfather taught her that too. The base is beginning to wake up. Lights flicker on in barracks windows. The smell of industrial coffee drifts from the mess hall. Somewhere a drill instructor is already screaming at someone about something that probably doesn't matter, but will be treated as life or death anyway because that's how the military works. It's a familiar symphony, and Bryn moves through it like a ghost. People see her and look away, unsure how to process what she represents. A woman in a man's world, succeeding where men have failed, and doing it all with such quiet competence that it's almost insulting to the loud, aggressive culture of special operations. Her quarters are Spartan, even by military standards. A rack, a wall locker, a small desk with nothing on it. No decorations, no personal touches beyond the 2 photographs she keeps hidden away. Her uniforms hang with mechanical precision, each one exactly 2 fingers apart from the next. Her boots are spit shine to a mirror finish, despite the fact that no one does that anymore, that it's become an anachronism from an older, harder military. But her grandfather did it, and so she does it, maintaining standards that most people have let slip, because standards are all that separate warriors from killers. By 5 a.m., she's in full kit for morning PT, 85 pounds of gear plate carrier, helmet, ammunition pouches, loaded with dead weight to simulate combat loads, 3 quarts of water, first aid kit, radio. The weight that would crush most people is barely noticeable to her anymore. She's done this so many times that her body has restructured itself around the burden-building muscle and bone density in response to the constant demands she places on it. The 15-mile ruck march route is familiar territory. She could walk it blindfolded, and once on a bet with Finn Gallagher, she actually did. Made it in under 2 hours and didn't trip once, navigating purely by memory and the feel of the ground beneath her boots. Finn had laughed so hard he'd cried, then bought her a beer and told her she was the most terrifying person he'd ever met. She'd taken it as the compliment it was meant to be. The armory beckons. This is her church and the weapons are her congregation. She signs out her personal kit, a custom MK-18 carbine with a 10.3-inch barrel suppressed fitted with an EOTech holographic sight that's been zeroed so many times the adjustment knobs are starting to wear. A Glock 19 with a custom trigger job suppressor, 3 magazines loaded with federal HST hollow points. And her grandfather's KA bar knife, the one he carried through 3 wars and eventually passed down to her with the simple instruction, don't lose it. The knife is a relic from another era. 7 inches of carbon steel, the blade worn thin from decades of sharpening the handle wrapped in paracord that's been replaced a dozen times. On the guard, barely visible anymore, is an engraving, Flint Grenada 83. It's killed at least 6 men that Bryn knows about, probably more that her grandfather never talked about. She's added 3 more to that tally. The blade drinks blood as readily now as it did 40 years ago. Some tools are simply timeless. She's field stripping the MK-18 for daily maintenance when a young voice interrupts her concentration. Chief Kessler. Bryn doesn't look up. Her hands continue their work disassembling the bolt carrier group with the unconscious ease of someone who's done this particular task roughly 10,000 times. What? It's not a question. It's barely even an acknowledgement. But it's more than most people get from her. I'm Seaman Riley Sutton, Chief. I was wondering if I could ask you about buds. Now Bryn does look up. The girl and she is a girl, maybe 22, with the kind of eager enthusiasm that's going to get crushed out of her in the first week of Hell Week stands at a respectful distance, hands clasped behind her back in a position of parade rest. That's almost correct, but not quite. She's fit, Bryn notes, with the automatic assessment that comes from years of evaluating potential teammates. Maybe 5'7", athletic build, good muscle definition in her forearms. But fitness isn't the question. The question is whether she has what it takes when fitness fails, when everything fails, when the only thing left is the decision to quit or continue. You ready to do 100 burpees right now in full kit? Bryn's voice is flat, emotionless. A challenge wrapped in a question, wrapped in a test. Sutton blinks. Right now, Chief. Yes or no, Seaman? A pause. The girl's eyes flick to the plate carrier hanging on the wall, doing the mental calculation of what wearing that weight would mean. No, Chief, not right now. Bryn returns to her rifle maintenance. Then don't waste my time. The dismissal is absolute. Sutton hovers for a moment, unsure if she's been insulted or educated or simply rejected, then retreats. Bryn watches her go in her peripheral vision and feels nothing. Not sympathy, not satisfaction, not the teaching impulse that supposedly comes naturally to senior enlisted personnel. She's not a teacher. She's not a mentor. She's a weapon, and weapons don't nurture. They cut. Her grandfather would have handled it differently. He would have smiled, made some joke to put the kid at ease, then spent an hour explaining the realities of special operations training and building her up to face it. But her grandfather had a capacity for human connection that died with him. Bryn has other qualities, harder ones, more useful ones, the ones that keep you alive when connection would get you killed. The rifle comes back together in under 30 seconds. Function check magazine, seats, bolt cycles, trigger, brakes, clean safety functions. Perfect. Everything in her life is perfect in the technical sense because that's the only sense that matters. Emotional perfection is a lie. Technical perfection is merely difficult. Across the base in an office that smells of old coffee and older resentments, Captain Garrett Voss is having the worst morning of his professional life. Again. It's becoming a pattern. The phone call from his ex-wife started at 0630 earlier than she usually bothers to twist the knife. Diane's voice had that particular quality of satisfaction that comes from delivering news she knows will hurt him. Ethan got his orders, Officer Development School Intelligence Track. He starts in 6 weeks. Voss had gripped the phone hard enough that his knuckles went white. He quit. He's giving up. No, Garrett. He's choosing a different path. Unlike you, he's smart enough to know when something isn't working. He failed Buds twice. He's weak. The laugh that came through the phone was sharp enough to draw blood. You know what's weak? Trying to force your son to live your fantasy because you spent 30 years behind a desk instead of doing the thing you actually wanted to do. He's not weak. He's just not you. Thank God. The call had ended there, Diane hanging up before Voss could formulate a response. Not that he had one. The truth has a way of cutting through every defense, and they both knew the truth that Garrett Voss had wanted to be a SEAL since he was 8 years old, and his father came home from Desert Storm with a trident and stories that made warfare sound like the highest calling of mankind. But he'd washed out of buds in the first week, a shin stress fracture, providing a medical excuse that everyone knew was really about not being able to hack it. So he'd gone surface warfare, pushing papers and managing logistics, and slowly dying inside while pretending that his career was everything he'd wanted. And then he'd pushed his son into the same dream, the same failure, the same shame. Twice. Because surely if Ethan succeeded where Garrett had failed, it would somehow redeem the wasted decades. But Ethan was smarter than that. Ethan had figured out that you can't live someone else's life and still call it living. Voss sits at his desk now staring at the training roster for today's joint demonstration. His eyes keep returning to one name, CPO B. Kessler, DevGru. Development Group, SEAL Team 6. The tip of the spear. The quiet professionals who do the things no one talks about in the places no one admits we operate. And it's a woman. Something about that fact has been eating at him for weeks, festering like an infected wound that he keeps picking at instead of treating. The logic he uses is dressed up in concerns about standards and readiness and unit cohesion. But underneath all that respectable camouflage is something uglier. If a woman can make it into the most elite unit in the military, what does that say about him? What does it mean that his son failed where she succeeded? What does it mean that he failed where she succeeded? The answer is too painful to examine directly, so instead he nurtures his resentment. He tells himself stories about political correctness and lowered standards and diversity quotas. He ignores the classified file that clearly states her record because that file contradicts the narrative he needs to believe. And today, in front of 180 service members, he's going to prove his point. He's going to expose her. He's going to show everyone that the emperor has no clothes, that excellence is being sacrificed on the altar of social progress, that the old ways were better. It doesn't occur to him that he's about to make the biggest mistake of his life. Or maybe it does occur to him somewhere in the part of his brain that still understands objective reality, but he's too far gone to care. Pride is a hell of a drug, and Garrett Voss is deep in its grip. 10 miles away, in a modest house that smells of gun oil and old memories, Master Chief Petty Officer Wyatt Drummond sits at his kitchen table and stares at a photograph. The same photograph that's in Bryn Kessler's locker, two young men in Grenada 1983, immortalized in a moment of survival and brotherhood. He's 60 years old now, and every one of those years shows on his face. Deep lines carved by stress and sun and the weight of command. Gray hair cut high and tight in a style that went out of fashion 20 years ago, but suits him anyway. Hands that shake slightly from old nerve damage, courtesy of a grenade that went off too close in Panama and left him partially deaf in his right ear. He's 6 months from retirement from the goal watch and the ceremony, in the transition to whatever comes after a lifetime of service. Part of him is ready for it. Most of him is terrified. But this morning he's thinking about Flint Kessler, his swim buddy, his brother in everything but blood. The man who saved his life in Grenada when an ambush turned their patrol into a nightmare of fire and confusion. Drummond had been 18, fresh out of training, and he'd frozen when the bullets started flying. Flint had dragged him into cover, slapped him hard enough to rattle his teeth, and said, "Breathe, kid. You can panic when we're home. Right now you shoot." And Drummond had shot and survived, and learned that combat is mostly about function, about doing the job even when every instinct screams at you to run. Flint taught him that. Flint taught him everything that mattered. He'd returned the favor in Panama, pulling a wounded Flint 400 meters through hostile territory to reach an extraction point, taking fire the whole way. And again in Desert Storm, though, by then they were both old hands moving through the chaos with the practiced efficiency of men who'd been doing this dance for a decade. After Desert Storm, Flint had retired. Not because he wanted to, but because his body gave him no choice. Shrapnel in his hip from Panama, a back injury from a botched parachute landing, and a heart that the Navy doctor said was already showing signs of strain. He'd gone home to San Diego, raised his granddaughter after her parents died, and poured everything he knew into making her something extraordinary. Drummond had watched it happen, had seen the 12-year-old girl, hollow-eyed with grief, transform into something harder and sharper and more dangerous than Flint had ever been. Bryn Kessler was her grandfather's masterpiece, the culmination of everything he'd learned about warfare and survival and the mental discipline required to walk into hell and walk back out. And now she's about to face something that Drummond saw coming weeks ago. He knows Garrett Voss, knows his type. The bitter wannabe who never made it, who resents everyone who did, who's going to take his failure out on the nearest target. And today that target is wearing Bryn Kessler's face. Drummond's phone sits on the table and he's been debating all morning whether to call her, to warn her, to give her the heads up that someone's gunning for her. But he doesn't, because Flint wouldn't have. Flint would have let her walk into the ambush, confident that she'd walk back out of it covered in someone else's blood. That was the kind of faith you had in people you'd trained, people you'd built, people who carried your legacy forward into a world you no longer recognized. She has his eyes, Drummond mutters to the empty kitchen. And his eyes question. The photograph doesn't answer. The dead never do. But Drummond can hear Flint's voice anyway, rough and certain. She'll be fine, Wyatt. She's a Kessler. We don't break. Drummond hopes he's right, but hope has never been a strategy, and he's learned over 40 years that faith is no substitute for preparation. So he'll go to the demonstration. He'll watch. And if Garrett Voss crosses a line he shouldn't cross, Drummond will do what Flint would have done. He'll end it. Quickly. Efficiently, with the kind of brutal finality that comes from having nothing left to lose and everything to protect. The morning progresses toward afternoon. The sun climbs higher, turning Coronado into an oven. And on the main training ground, a crowd begins to gather for a demonstration that will become the stuff of legend, whispered about in barracks and mess halls for years to come. The kind of story that gets better with each retelling until the truth becomes indistinguishable from myth. But for now, in these last moments before everything changes, Bryn Kessler is just a woman doing her job. She stands in the equipment cage, checking her gear one final time. Plate carrier secured, magazine pouches loaded, Glock holstered at her hip. Grandfather's knife hanging inverted from her left shoulder, readily accessible for either hand. Everything in its place, everything ready. Her face shows nothing, no anticipation, no anxiety, no awareness that she's about to become the center of a storm. She's done hundreds of these demonstrations. They're boring, mostly performances for people who will never see real combat but need to feel like they understand it. She goes through the motions, executes the techniques with textbook precision, and goes home. That's the job. That's always the job. But today will be different. Today someone will push. Today someone will demand more than she's willing to give politely. Today, the careful control she's maintained for 8 years will be tested in front of an audience. And today that audience will learn what her 47 confirmed kills already know, that Bryn Kessler is not a woman pretending to be a warrior. She is a warrior who happens to be a woman, and the difference between those two things is measured in blood. The call comes over the radio. All demo participants report to Training Ground Alpha. 15 minutes. Bryn acknowledges with a single word, Roger. She secures her gear and begins the walk to what will become known unofficially and permanently as Kessler's Circle. She doesn't know that yet. She doesn't know that in 90 minutes her life will change irrevocably. She doesn't know that a bitter captain with a grudge is about to make a decision so catastrophically stupid that it will end his career and launch her into a kind of fame she never wanted. All she knows is that she has a job to do, and Bryn Kessler has never failed to complete a job. The afternoon sun beats down on Coronado. The crowd gathers, and in the wings, Master Chief Wyatt Drummond watches with the patient certainty of someone who knows exactly how this story ends. It ends in silence. It ends in 1.2 seconds. It ends with the kind of lesson that only needs to be taught once. But first it has to begin. Training Ground Alpha shimmers in the afternoon heat, a rectangle of packed dirt and suffering that's witnessed 1,000 demonstrations and will witness 1,000 more. But today will be different. Today will be remembered. 180 personnel form a loose semicircle around the demonstration mat. SEALs, Marines, a few Army Rangers on joint training rotation. The kind of crowd that's seen everything done, everything, and thinks nothing can surprise them anymore. They're about to learn otherwise. Bryn Kessler stands at the center, paired with Seaman Tyler Brennan, for a basic close-quarters combat demonstration. The exercise is simple. Brennan throws a telegraphed right hook. Bryn demonstrates the appropriate defensive response. She's done this 100 times. It's choreography, not combat. Performance, not warfare. Brennan throws the punch. It's slow, obvious, exactly what the drill requires. Bryn's response is textbook perfect, a subtle lateral movement barely 2 inches that redirects his momentum. Her left hand guides his arm past her center line, while her right maintains position for a potential counter. The entire sequence takes 1.4 seconds. Efficient, professional, flawless. Stop, Captain Garrett Voss's voice cracks across the training ground like a whip. Stop right there. The assembled personnel shift uncomfortably. Interrupting a demonstration is unusual. Interrupting with that tone of voice is something else entirely. Voss strides onto the mat, his face flushed, his body language radiating the kind of aggressive authority that compensates for a lack of actual confidence. That's dancing. What kind of backwater program teaches you to waltz with the enemy? Bryn's face reveals nothing. Her hands return to a neutral position. Her breathing remains steady, 58 beats per minute. She's been here before in a dozen different forms. The details change. The script never does. In real combat, Voss continues, his voice rising. Hesitation gets Marines killed. It gets your team killed. He's not looking at Bryn now. He's playing to the crowd, feeding off the attention. Is this what development group sends us now? Politicians in uniform. A few nervous laughs ripple through the assembled personnel, not from agreement, but from the instinctive desire to align with power even when power is being wielded poorly. Bryn says nothing. Silence is her armor. It always has been. Maybe you need a reality check. Chief Petty Officer. Voss scans the crowd and his eyes land on Gunnery Sergeant Colt Merrick. Gunny on the mat. Merrick's face shows a flicker of hesitation. At 6'5" and 270 pounds, he's a mountain of controlled violence. A Marine Corps martial arts program black belt. An instructor who spent 15 years teaching people how to hurt other people efficiently. Sir, this is a demonstration, not... That's an order, Marine. I want you to show her what real combat looks like. Merrick approaches slowly, catching Bryn's eye for just a moment. He sees something there that makes him uncomfortable. Not fear, not uncertainty, just calm, infinite patience. The look of someone who's already calculated every possible outcome and found all of them manageable. Full contact engagement, Voss announces to the crowd. Right hook to the jaw. That's what a real enemy would do. Not this dancing. Show her, Gunny. The training ground goes very quiet. This has crossed a line. Everyone knows it, but no one speaks. Rank has its privileges, and those privileges include the ability to make catastrophically poor decisions that everyone else has to witness. Merrick sets his stance. His face carries an expression that might be apology or resignation or both. Chief, he says quietly, I'm sorry. Orders. Bryn gives him a micro nod. The gesture says, do your job, I'll do mine. We're both professionals here. She settles into position. To the untrained eye, her stance looks relaxed, almost casual. But Master Chief Wyatt Drummond, watching from 100 yards away, recognizes what he's seeing. It's the same stance her grandfather used. Weight distributed perfectly. Hips at an angle that maximizes options while minimizing commitment. Hands that appear neutral, but are actually coiled springs ready to redirect force in any direction required. Proceed, Voss commands. Merrick doesn't waste time. He's been given an order, and he's a Marine, which means he'll execute it. His right hand cocks back, telegraphing the punch clearly enough that everyone can see it coming. 270 pounds of muscle and bone committed to a single devastating trajectory aimed at Bryn Kessler's jaw. What happens next occurs in the space between heartbeats. At T-minus 0.1 seconds, Bryn's weight shifts to her back foot. 2 inches. Not a retreat, a repositioning. At 0.2 seconds, Merrick's fist passes within 1.5 inches of her jaw. Close enough that several people in the crowd gasp, certain they have just witnessed a knockout. At 0.3 seconds, Bryn's left hand makes contact with Merrick's tricep. Not blocking, not stopping, guiding. Using his momentum against him in a principle as old as warfare itself. At 0.5 seconds, the gunnery sergeant's center of gravity is no longer his own. He's stumbling forward off balance, his 270 pounds, becoming a liability instead of an asset. At zero point 0.7 seconds, Bryn is behind him. Her right arm snakes around his neck with the speed and precision of a striking viper. At zero point 0.9 seconds, the rear naked choke is locked. Bicep on one carotid artery, forearm blade on the other. Her left hand grips her own bicep, completing the circuit. At 1.2 seconds, Merrick is tapping frantically on her arm. The universal signal of submission. He knows the technique. He knows its finality. He knows he's been beaten by someone who outweighs him by 135 pounds. At 1.8 seconds, Bryn releases him and steps back. Her breathing is unchanged. Her face is unchanged. She could do this 19 more times and not break a sweat. Colt Merrick drops to his knees, gasping, his face a mixture of shock and profound respect. The crowd is silent, not the uncomfortable silence from before. Something deeper. The silence of witnessing something that shouldn't be possible but undeniably is. Captain Voss's jaw hangs open. His face has gone from flushed to pale in the span of 3 seconds. His mind is struggling to process what just happened, trying to reconcile what he saw with what he believes should be true. Into this silence walks Master Chief Wyatt Drummond. He moves with the deliberate pace of someone who knows that everyone will bond it for him, that his presence carries weight that has nothing to do with rank and everything to do with earned respect. The crowd parts without being asked. He walks directly to the training. Admin takes the roster clipboard and scans it until he finds what he's looking for. Then he turns to face Captain Voss. The look on his face could freeze water. Captain, his voice is low controlled, but it carries across the training ground like thunder. You asked what backwater program Chief Kessler crawled out of. Allow me to enlighten you. He holds up the clipboard. Name Kessler Bryn, Chief Petty Officer, Unit Naval Special Warfare Development Group. A collective intake of breath from the assembled personnel. Development Group, SEAL Team 6. The ones who don't exist, who do the things no one talks about. Primary military occupational specialty, Scout Sniper. Secondary close quarters, Battle Specialist. Operational deployments, 8. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen. Confirmed kills 47. Classified missions. Actual number likely higher. Voss is now completely pale. His hands are shaking. Combat decorations. Drummond continues, his voice dropping even lower, which somehow makes it more devastating. Navy Cross, second highest military decoration. Citation remains classified. Silver Star with Oak Leaf Cluster. 3 Bronze Stars with Valor Device. Purple Heart. The list, Captain goes on for another page. He pauses, lets the weight of all those words settle over the crowd like ash. Her last classified operation 18 months ago, Helmand Province. 12-man Marine unit pinned down by 50-plus Taliban. Chief Kessler inserted solo. 11 confirmed kills in 14 minutes. Precision rifle work. Then she assaulted the compound. 8 more hostiles neutralized in close quarters. Extracted all 12 Marines. His voice cracks slightly. Lost 1 SEAL in the process. Petty Officer Finn Gallagher. He took a round meant for her. Drummond pulls a photograph from his pocket. The same one Bryn keeps in her locker. 2 young men in Grenada, 1983. Her grandfather, Senior Chief Dalton Kessler, was my swim buddy. Grenada, Panama, Desert Storm. That man saved my life, twice. He looks at Bryn and something passes between them. Recognition, respect, legacy. Before he died, he told me, Wyatt, I trained her to be better than me, better than you, better than all of us. He turns back to Voss and his voice becomes ice. Captain, you ordered a Marine to strike a Chief Petty Officer, a decorated combat veteran, a member of the most elite unit in naval special warfare. You didn't expose weakness. You exposed your own ignorance. In the crowd, several senior enlisted personnel are nodding. A few officers look uncomfortable, aware that they're witnessing a career ending in real time. Drummond snaps to attention, renders a crisp, perfect salute directly to Bryn. Chief Kessler, your professionalism is a credit to the command, as you were. Bryn returns the salute with equal precision. Thank you, Master Chief. Drummond's gaze returns to Voss one final time. Dismissed, Captain. The words hang in the air. Voss stands frozen, his world crumbling, his assumptions shattered. Then without a word, he turns and walks away. The crowd parts for him too, but this time it's not out of respect. It's something closer to pity. Merrick, still on the mat, looks up at Bryn. "Chief, I apologize." Bryn's expression softens by the smallest degree. "You followed orders, Gunny. I respect that." A pause. "Besides, you telegraphed that punch from orbit." Despite everything, Merrick laughs. "Yes, Chief." The crowd begins to disperse, but the story is already spreading, already transforming, already becoming legend. And on the mat that will soon be known as Kessler's Circle, Bryn Kessler stands alone for a moment, breathing slowly, her heart rate returning to its resting 58 beats per minute. She thinks about her grandfather, about Finn, about all the battles fought in silence, all the victories no one witnesses, all the competence that speaks louder than words ever could. Then she secures her gear and walks away. There's always another mission. There's always more work to do. The afternoon sun beats down on Coronado. The legend has begun. And somewhere watching it all, the ghosts of warriors past are nodding their approval. Silence has spoken. And the world has finally heard. The morning after what would forever be known simply as the incident arrived with the kind of brutal clarity that follows seismic events. The sun rose over Coronado exactly as it always had, indifferent to the fact that the social architecture of the base had been fundamentally restructured in the span of 90 seconds. Bryn Kessler woke at 0400, same as always, her internal clock as reliable as any mechanical timepiece. She ran her 15 miles with a full combat load. She cleaned her weapons with the same methodical precision. She spoke to no one, and no one spoke to her, though now the silence carried a different weight. By 0800, when most of the base population was shuffling toward the mess hall for breakfast, the legend had already metastasized beyond recognition. In one version, Bryn had knocked out Gunnery Sergeant Colt Merrick with a single finger strike to a pressure point, some kind of mystical technique learned from shadowy instructors in classified locations. In another, she'd actually let him hit her first, taken the full force of his punch, then smiled before putting him down. A third version insisted she was actually CIA, not Navy, and the whole thing had been a test to see how the base would react to a female operator in their midst. The truth was simultaneously more mundane and more impressive than any of the myths. She'd simply been better, faster, more skilled. She'd taken a man who outweighed her by more than 100 pounds and made him look like an amateur in front of an audience that included some of the most elite warfighters on the planet. And she'd done it with such casual efficiency that it was almost insulting to everyone who'd spent years cultivating their own reputations for lethality. The training mat where it happened had acquired a new name overnight. Someone had used a permanent marker to write Kessler's Circle on the edge of the platform. The base commanding officer had ordered it removed. By noon, it was back, this time carved into the wood itself with what appeared to be a Ka bar knife. The CO gave up after the third attempt to erase it. Some things he was learning had a momentum all their own. Bryn herself remained utterly uninterested in her new status as a walking legend. When Navy Times sent an email requesting an interview, she deleted it without reading past the subject line. When Stars and Stripes followed up with a phone call, she let it go to voicemail and never listened to the message. Admiral Rachel Stokes, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, personally called to request that Bryn participate in a recruitment video aimed at encouraging more women to pursue special operations careers. Bryn's response was a model of professional brevity. "Ma'am, with respect, I'm an operator, not a spokesmodel. Request denied." The admiral had laughed, which surprised her aide, who'd been listening on the line. "Chief Kessler, that attitude is exactly why you'd be perfect for this." "Permission to speak freely, ma'am." "Granted. I don't want to be perfect for recruitment. I want to be perfect for the next mission. Everything else is a distraction." There was a long pause on the line, and when Admiral Stokes spoke again, her voice carried a note of something that might have been respect or resignation or both. "The next mission, Chief. When it comes, you'll be my first call." "Thank you, ma'am." Bryn had ended the call and immediately forgotten about it. In her world, promises of future missions were as reliable as weather forecasts. You prepared for every possibility and trusted nothing until boots were on the ground and bullets were in the air. What she couldn't forget, despite her best efforts, was the look on Master Chief Wyatt Drummond's face when he'd revealed her record to the assembled crowd. There'd been something in his expression that went beyond professional respect or institutional pride. It had been personal, familial almost. The look of a man fulfilling a promise made long ago to someone who was no longer alive to see it kept. Her grandfather had saved Drummond's life, and now Drummond was repaying that debt by ensuring that no one could diminish or dismiss what Bryn had become. She'd sought him out that evening, finding him in his office long after normal working hours. "Your grandfather would be proud, Chief." His voice was rough-tired. "He taught me well, Master Chief." A long silence stretched between them, comfortable in the way that silence between warriors often is. Finally, Drummond had pulled something from his desk drawer. An old Polaroid, the colors faded to that distinctive 1980s palette. Two young men in Grenada 1983, bloodied but alive. I held this when he died, held his hand in this picture, and I promised him I'd look after you. Make sure the Navy didn't waste you or break you or grind you down into something you're not. He'd looked up at her then and his eyes were wet. "I'm not sure I've done a very good job of that." "You've done fine, Master Chief. You don't let anyone in, kid. You're so goddamn competent. It's like armor, but armor's heavy. Eventually it crushes you if you don't take it off sometimes." Bryn had no answer to that, so she'd simply nodded and left. What was there to say? He was right. She knew he was right. But knowing and caring were different things, and she'd stopped caring about her own emotional well-being somewhere around her fourth deployment when caring had become a liability she couldn't afford. Now, 72 hours after the incident, the real consequences were beginning to manifest. Captain Garrett Voss had disappeared. Not literally, but professionally. He'd been reassigned to the Pentagon with such speed that his office at Coronado was cleared out before most people knew he was gone. The official story was that he'd been selected for an important administrative role. The unofficial story, which everyone believed, was that he'd been exiled to a broom closet with no windows and no future, an administrative purgatory for officers whose careers were over, but who couldn't quite be fired outright. But Voss wasn't gone. Not yet. And he was about to make his presence felt in a way that would force Bryn out of her carefully maintained isolation and into a conflict that had nothing to do with combat and everything to do with the kind of bureaucratic warfare that's often more vicious than anything that happens on a battlefield. The summons came at 1300 hours on a Tuesday. Bryn was in the middle of a training session running room-clearing drills with a squad of junior operators who were trying very hard not to stare at her like she was some kind of mythical creature. The radio crackled with a message that stopped her mid-movement. "Chief Kessler, report to JSOC Operations Center, Dam Neck, immediate. Transportation standing by." Dam Neck, Joint Special Operations Command Headquarters for the East Coast. That wasn't a casual meeting. That was a mission brief. Bryn felt something stir in her chest, something that might have been anticipation if she still allowed herself to feel such things. This was what she was built for. This was why all the training and sacrifice and isolation mattered. She was wheels up within 20 minutes, sitting in the back of a C-12 Huron transport with nothing but her thoughts and the steady drone of the engines. The flight to Virginia took 4 hours, and she spent them doing what she always did before missions, running through mental checklists, visualizing scenarios, preparing her mind for whatever was coming. By the time the plane touched down, she was as ready as it was possible to be. The skiff's sensitive, compartmented information facility was buried 3 stories underground, a concrete bunker designed to be impervious to electronic surveillance. The security to get inside was impressive even by special operations standards. Retinal scan, fingerprint analysis, an armed guard who checked her credentials 3 times before allowing her through. The message was clear. Whatever was about to be discussed was serious enough to warrant this level of paranoia. Captain Marcus Bull Tarango was waiting for her in the briefing room. He was a SEAL officer, 40-something, with the kind of weathered face that came from spending more time deployed than stateside. Bryn knew him by reputation. Competent fare, the kind of mission commander who led from the front and never asked his people to do anything he wouldn't do himself. "Chief Kessler, thanks for coming on short notice." He gestured to a chair. "Coffee?" "No, thank you, sir." Bryn sat, her posture perfect, her attention absolute. Tarango pulled up a slide on the screen dominating one wall. A photograph of a woman, mid-30s, brown hair, tired eyes that had seen too much of the wrong parts of the world. Meredith Harper, age 32, USAID contractor, civil engineer by training. She's been building schools in Anbar province for the past 3 years. Good work, important work, exactly the kind of thing that's supposed to win hearts and minds. He clicked to the next slide. A grainy surveillance photo showing the same woman now gaunt and hollow-eyed, visible through a barred window. 53 days ago, her convoy was ambushed outside Ramadi. 2 local security guards were killed. Harper was taken. We've had intermittent intelligence on her location, but nothing solid enough to act on until now. Another click, a satellite image of what appeared to be an abandoned industrial complex. Former pharmaceutical factory 8 clicks west of Ramadi. ISIS-affiliated militia is using it as a staging area. We estimate 18 to 22 fighters. The cell leader is a high-value target in his own right, Abu Rashid al-Samara, Egyptian national bomb maker, responsible for at least 15 IED attacks that killed 43 coalition personnel. Bryn studied the image, her mind already processing sightlines and approach vectors and a dozen other tactical considerations. Rescue mission. Extraction with prejudice. Get Harper out, eliminate al-Samara, if possible, disrupt their operations. The constraint is that the compound has a section where they keep local women forced labor, essentially. We need a female operator who can access that area without raising immediate alarm, get eyes on Harper's exact location, then signal the team. What's the timeline? Tarango's expression darkened. That's where it gets complicated. Our intel suggests they're planning to execute her in 96 hours. Some kind of propaganda video. We have a 72-hour window to put this together and execute. Team composition. 4 operators, you'd be team lead. Lieutenant Jackson Cole Breacher out of Development Group. Sergeant First Class Harrison Reed, Delta Force Medic. Staff Sergeant Pierce Donovan, Marine Scout Sniper. Good people, all of them. You'd have operational control. Something in the way Tarango said it made Bryn pause. Team lead, operational control. Those weren't terms that got thrown around lightly, especially not for a chief petty officer. Typically, an officer would be mission commander. The fact that they were offering her the role meant either they had extraordinary confidence in her abilities or something was wrong. Sir, with respect, why me specifically? Tarango hesitated, and that hesitation told her everything she needed to know before he even spoke. Because you're the best person for this mission, and because someone at the Pentagon has flagged your security clearance for review. The words landed like a physical blow. Bryn's expression didn't change. She'd learned long ago to control her face even when her mind was racing, but internally she was already 3 steps ahead, understanding the implications. On what grounds? The official documentation cites concerns about psychological stability following a public incident. Tarango's tone made it clear what he thought of that assessment. Someone filed a report suggesting you demonstrated violent and unpredictable behavior during a training demonstration. They're recommending a full psychological evaluation before you're cleared for further deployment. Bryn's hands resting on the table didn't move, didn't clench into fists, didn't betray any of the cold fury that was building in her chest. Captain Voss, that would be my guess, though the filing is anonymous. Regardless of who's behind it, the bureaucracy is the bureaucracy. Your clearance is under review, which means officially I can't assign you to this mission. And unofficially, Tarango leaned back in his chair, studying her. Unofficially, I think it's bullshit. I've read your file, the real file, not the sanitized version. I've talked to people who've operated with you. Every single one of them said the same thing. You're the most competent operator they've ever worked with, bar none. Not the most competent female operator. The most competent, period. So unofficially, I want you on this mission, but I can't put you on it until we clear up this administrative garbage. How long will that take? Could be days, could be weeks. The review board meets on its own schedule. Bryn was silent for a long moment, processing. Somewhere in Iraq, Meredith Harper was sitting in a cell counting down the hours until someone cut her throat in front of a camera. And the mission to save her was being delayed by a bitter captain's petty revenge. The injustice of it was almost too large to comprehend. What do you need from me, sir? Right now, nothing. Go back to Coronado, maintain your readiness, and pray that someone higher up the chain sees this for what it is and unfucks it before that 72-hour window closes. Tarango stood signaling the end of the briefing. Off the record, Chief, this is the kind of thing that makes me ashamed of the organization I've served for 20 years. You deserve better. Bryn stood as well, came to attention. Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted, I don't need better. I need Meredith Harper to go home to her family. Everything else is just noise. She saluted about-faced and walked out before Tarango could respond. The flight back to Coronado was longer than the flight out, or maybe it just felt that way. Bryn sat in the darkness of the cargo bay and allowed herself for just a moment to feel the weight of her situation. For 8 years, she'd operated on the principle that competence would be enough, that if she was just good enough, skilled enough, professional enough, the resistance would eventually fade, that she could prove her way past prejudice. But competence wasn't enough. It would never be enough, because the people opposing her weren't operating on logic or fairness or any system that rewarded merit. They were operating on fear and resentment and the desperate need to maintain a hierarchy that was crumbling beneath their feet. And you couldn't outperform fear. You couldn't outshoot resentment. Those enemies required different weapons. By the time she landed at Coronado, a plan was forming. Not a combat plan, she had plenty of those. Her mind generated them constantly like background radiation, but a strategic plan. She needed allies. She needed leverage. She needed to fight this battle the way wars were actually won, not with the most bullets, but with the right pressure applied at the right points. Her first stop was the base gym. It was 2,200 hours late enough that most sane people were asleep, which meant the weight room would be occupied only by the kind of obsessives who couldn't function without their daily punishment. She found Gunnery Sergeant Colt Merrick exactly where she expected to find him, under a loaded barbell, pressing 225 pounds, like it was a personal insult he needed to answer. He saw her approaching in the mirror and sat up, his expression complex. Shame, respect, and something that might have been gratitude, all fighting for dominance. Chief Kessler. Gunny, got a minute? For you, yeah. He stood wiping sweat from his face with a towel that had seen better days. Look, about the other day. You followed orders, nothing to apologize for. Still, I knew it was wrong, should have said something. Bryn studied him for a moment. He was sincere, she could tell. The kind of sincere that came from actual moral discomfort, not just social pressure. That was useful. That was exactly what she needed. You want to make it right? Merrick straightened slightly, the military bearing asserting itself even in gym clothes. Yes, Chief, how? Captain Voss is blocking my next deployment. Filed false reports about psychological instability. There's a woman in Iraq who's going to die because of it. She watched his face carefully, seeing the anger build. Good. Anger was fuel. You know anything about that? Merrick's jaw tightened. I know Voss has been making calls. Heard him on the phone to some admiral at the Pentagon talking about how we need to maintain standards and correct the mistake before it becomes permanent. I didn't know he was targeting you specifically, but I'm not surprised. My sister. The words came out harder than he'd probably intended. Captain Diana Merrick, Army Intelligence. She faced the same thing. Not as blatant, but the same pattern. Superior officer claimed she was emotionally unstable, used it to derail her career. Investigation cleared her eventually, but the damage was done. She resigned her commission, went home to Kansas. He paused and pain flickered across his face. 2 years later, she drove her car off a bridge. Single vehicle accident, they said. No witnesses. You think it was suicide? I know it was suicide. She left a note, but the family kept it quiet. She wrote that she was tired of fighting, tired of proving herself, tired of being excellent, and still being treated like she was one mistake away from confirming every prejudice they had about women in combat roles. Merrick met Bryn's eyes directly. I won't let it happen again. Tell me what you need. Evidence. Anything that proves Voss is acting out of bias rather than legitimate concern. Recordings, emails, anything with his fingerprints on it. Merrick was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing something. Then he pulled out his phone, tapped through several screens, and held it up to show her. I work admin part-time, access to the base phone system. I've been, let's say, monitoring certain conversations since the incident. Wasn't sure what I'd do with the information, but I knew I needed it. On the screen was a timestamp and a file labeled Voss Preston Call 01. Bryn raised an eyebrow. Preston, boy, Vice Admiral Kenneth Preston. He's Voss's old mentor from the academy. Old guard, 2 years from retirement, exactly the kind of dinosaur who thinks women belong on pedestals, not in combat. Merrick tapped play. The audio quality was poor but intelligible. Voss's voice came through first. Ken, we've got a situation developing that needs to be addressed before it metastasizes. What kind of situation? Preston's voice was gravelly, the sound of expensive cigars and expensive whiskey. The Kessler woman, development group, she's becoming a symbol and it's creating exactly the kind of pressure we've been trying to avoid. More women are applying for buds, citing her as inspiration. Standards are going to erode. Standards haven't changed, Garrett. Not officially, but you know how this works. Political pressure builds. Someone in Congress starts asking questions about why we don't have more female operators, and suddenly the instructors are being told to pass people who shouldn't pass. What do you want to do about it? A pause. Then Voss's voice quieter but absolutely clear. We need to sideline her before she becomes untouchable. Make her radioactive for a while, give the momentum time to die down. How do you propose we do that? Psychological evaluation. We flag her for review based on the training incident. Claims she demonstrated concerning behavior needs assessment before further deployment. It buys us 6 months minimum, maybe longer if we can drag out the bureaucracy. You're sure about this if it blows back? It won't. Who's going to question a legitimate safety concern? We phrase it right, we're just being prudent. The recording ended. Bryn and Merrick looked at each other in silence. Finally, Bryn said, "How many of these do you have?" 3 more, all the same pattern. Voss coordinating with Preston and 2 other admirals to construct a case against you that has nothing to do with your actual performance. Send them to me, encrypted. Already done. They're in your secure email as of 5 minutes ago. Merrick smiled slightly. I'm a Marine chief, not an idiot. I knew you'd want them. Bryn felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. Not quite gratitude, she didn't trust positive emotions enough for that, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe. The acknowledgement that not everyone was an enemy, that some people would stand up when it mattered. Your sister would be proud of you, Gunny. Merrick's face did something complicated. I hope so. I failed her when she needed me. Maybe this is, I don't know, penance. It's not penance, it's the job. Taking care of each other. Bryn stood. Thank you. She left before the conversation could get any more emotional. There was work to do, and sentiment was a luxury she still couldn't afford. The recordings were ammunition, but ammunition was useless without a weapon system to deliver it. She needed someone with the authority and the will to use this information against men who had spent decades building their power base. Admiral Rachel Stokes received the email at 0600 the next morning. She'd been awake for an hour already, working through the stack of reports and requests and bureaucratic debris that accumulated overnight like sediment. The message from an anonymous sender with a .mil address should have been filtered by her security software, but somehow it had slipped through. The subject line read, "Regarding CPO Kessler's clearance review." Stokes almost deleted it unread. She got 100 crank messages a week from people with axes to grind and conspiracy theories to peddle, but something made her pause. Maybe it was intuition. Maybe it was just the coffee finally kicking in. Either way, she clicked it open. 20 minutes later, she was on a secure line with Vice Admiral Kenneth Preston, and her voice had acquired the particular quality of contained fury that subordinates had learned to fear over her 30-year career. Kenneth, we need to talk about Chief Petty Officer Bryn Kessler. Rachel, good morning. What about her? I've just listened to some very interesting recordings. Conversations between you and Captain Garrett Voss about sidelining a decorated operator for political reasons. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough to be damning all by itself. Finally, I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence. I have 4 separate recordings of you conspiring to destroy a SEAL's career because you're threatened by the fact that she has ovaries. Would you like me to play them for you? Or can we skip the part where you pretend you have any moral high ground here? Rachel, you don't understand the bigger picture. I understand perfectly. You're a relic from a bygone era who can't accept that the world has changed, and rather than adapt, you've decided to sabotage excellence because it doesn't come in the package you prefer. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to retire this month, quietly. No ceremony, no fanfare. You're going to submit your paperwork tomorrow and cite personal reasons. You can't force me to. Actually, I can, Because if you don't, I'm forwarding these recordings to the CNO, the Inspector General, and the Senate Armed Services Committee. And then you won't be retiring. You'll be facing court-martial for conspiracy, obstruction, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Your pension, your reputation, your legacy, all of it goes up in smoke. So yes, Kenneth, I absolutely can force you. Another long silence. Then quietly, what about Voss? Voss is next on my list. Unlike you, he might actually have a chance at redemption. But that's not your concern anymore. You're done. You have the 24 hours to submit your retirement paperwork. If I don't see it by this time tomorrow, I start making phone calls you won't enjoy. Stokes ended the call and immediately dialed again. This time, Captain Garrett Voss answered on the third ring, his voice carrying the tentative quality of a man who knows he's in trouble but doesn't know how much yet. Captain Voss, Admiral Stokes, I need you in my office today, 1400 hours. Don't be late. Ma'am, I'm currently assigned to the Pentagon. I'm not sure I can get to. I don't care if you're currently assigned to the International Space Station. You will be in my office at 1400 hours, or you will be relieved of duty by 1500 hours. Are we clear? Yes, ma'am. The line went dead. Stokes sat back in her chair and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. She'd spent 3 decades navigating the political minefields of the military, watching talented people get crushed by small-minded bureaucrats who were more concerned with maintaining the old order than building a better institution. This was one battle she could actually win, and she intended to enjoy it. At 1400 hours precisely, Garrett Voss stood in Admiral Stokes's office and listened to his career crumble in real time. She didn't waste time with pleasantries, simply played the recordings one after another, watching his face drain of color with each damning conversation. When the last one finished, she leaned forward, her hands clasped on the desk between them. I'm going to give you 3 options, Captain, and I want you to think very carefully before you choose. Option A, you resign immediately. No investigation, no questions. You just disappear quietly and we all move on with our lives. Option B, I refer this to the Inspector General. You face formal investigation, probable court-martial, and dishonorable discharge. Your family loses your pension. Your reputation is destroyed, and you spend the rest of your life as a cautionary tale. Option C, you personally clear Chief Kessler's mission authorization. Submit a written apology to her personnel file and testify against Preston in his misconduct hearing. In exchange, you get administrative separation with an honorable discharge, and you keep your pension. Voss stood silent, his mind clearly racing through the implications. Finally, what does option C accomplish besides saving my pension? It accomplishes the mission. Chief Kessler gets deployed, an American civilian gets rescued, and you demonstrate that you have at least a shred of honor left. Stokes's voice was hard. This isn't about you, Captain. It never was. It's about a woman in Iraq who's going to die if we don't get our act together. And if I choose option A or B, Kessler still gets her mission. I'll find another way to clear her, but you lose everything and you lose it publicly. This is about whether you want to do one right thing before you're done. The silence stretched. Voss looked at his hands at the floor anywhere but at the Admiral, whose judgment was dissecting him. Finally, he said, I need to make one stop before I can clear her. I need to talk to Chief Kessler directly. Why? Because she deserves to hear this from me, not as paperwork, not through channels. She deserves to know that I understand what I did was wrong. Stokes studied him carefully, looking for manipulation or angle or some last-ditch attempt to salvage his ego, but all she saw was a broken man who'd finally glimpsed his own reflection clearly and didn't like what he saw. Fine, you have 72 hours. But Voss, if you're playing me, if this is some scheme to try to save face, I will destroy you so completely that your grandchildren will still be feeling the aftershocks. Are we clear? Crystal, ma'am. The flight back to Coronado gave Voss plenty of time to think about how his life had come to this moment. He'd spent 30 years building a career, cultivating relationships, positioning himself for eventual flag rank. And it was all disintegrating because he'd let his bitterness poison his judgment. Because he'd looked at Bryn Kessler and seen not a competent operator, but a threat to everything he'd told himself about why his own career had stalled. She was a mirror reflecting his failures, and instead of learning from that reflection, he tried to break the mirror. He found her at Kessler's Circle, And how much did it say that the training mat now bore her name at 0600? She was running room-clearing drills alone, moving through the choreography of violence, with a fluidity that was almost beautiful if you forgot what it represented. She must have known he was there. Operators like her always knew when they were being observed, but she didn't acknowledge his presence until she'd finished the drill sequence. Captain Voss. Her voice was neutral, no inflection at all. You're a long way from the Pentagon. Mr. Voss now. He held up his hand showing he carried nothing threatening. I resigned, or I'm about to. Depends on how you want to define it. What do you want? To give you this. He pulled an envelope from his jacket, official military stationery, authorization to clear you for immediate deployment. Signed by Admiral Stokes, countersigned by me. Whatever mission you have been flagged for, you're green-lit as of now. Bryn took the envelope, opened it, scanned the contents with the quick efficiency of someone used to processing operational orders. You're clearing me because Admiral Stokes ordered you to. Yes. Not because you believe I'm competent. No, I mean yes. Voss stopped, gathered himself. I believe you're competent. That was never really the question. You're probably the most competent operator I've ever seen, and I've been around this world for 30 years. But competence was never why I came after you. Why did you Because my son failed Buds twice, and watching you succeed where he failed made me feel like a failure as a father. Because I never made it through myself, and you represent everything I wanted to be but couldn't. Because seeing you prove that gender isn't a limiting factor means I have to accept that I failed for other reasons, and those reasons all point back at me. He met her eyes. I was wrong. Not just strategically wrong or professionally wrong, morally wrong. And I'm sorry. Bryn was silent for a long moment, studying him with those dark, unreadable eyes. Finally, your son. Where is he now? Officer Development School, Intel Track. He's good at it. Happy, I think, for the first time in years. Then you did something right. One thing out of 30 years, not exactly a stellar record. One thing matters more than you'd think. She folded the authorization letter and slipped it into her cargo pocket. Your father, was he a SEAL? Voss blinked, surprised by the question. Yes, Commander Harrison Voss. How did you know? My grandfather mentioned him once. Desert Storm. Said he was a good man. Said he saved his unit. Bryn's expression didn't change, but something in her voice softened just slightly. He also said your father would be ashamed of you. Now I understand why. The words hit like a physical blow, but Voss took them without flinching. He would be. He absolutely would be. Then stop being someone he'd be ashamed of. Bryn turned and walked away, leaving Voss standing alone on what would forever be known as Kessler's Circle. He stood there for a long time, the morning sun warming his face, and tried to remember what it had felt like to believe in something larger than his own ego. It took a while, but eventually he found it. By the time the sun reached its zenith, the paperwork was complete. Bryn's clearance was restored. The mission was greenlit, and in 72 hours, she would be wheels up for Iraq, leading a team into hostile territory to pull one American civilian out of hell. But before that could happen, there was preparation. There was always preparation. And for Bryn Kessler, preparation was a form of worship, the only ritual she still believed in. Master Chief Wyatt Drummond found her on the range that evening, firing her last qualification before deployment. 500 rounds through her Mk-18, every single one hitting center mass at distances ranging from 50 to 600 yards. When she finally cleared the weapon and set it down, he approached with something held carefully in both hands. Your grandfather wore this for 22 years. He held out a worn seal trident, the gold faded to bronze, one point chipped from shrapnel, dark stains that might have been blood, but were never cleaned away. He gave it to me when he retired, told me to give it to you when you were ready. Bryn took it carefully, feeling the weight of history in her palm. Master Chief, I can't. You can, you will. Pin it inside your plate carrier, over your heart, and you bring it home. His voice was firm, the voice of someone giving an order rather than making a request. You know why you'll bring it home? Why? Because you're a Kessler, and Kesslers don't quit. They complete the mission. Always. That night, alone in her quarters, Bryn pinned the trident to the interior of her plate carrier, right where it would rest against her heart during the mission. She touched it once briefly and whispered something that might have been a prayer, if she still believed in such things. "I won't let you down, grandfather, either of you." The photos on her wall, her grandfather and Finn Gallagher, seemed to stare back at her, two ghosts, keeping watch over a woman who'd become a ghost herself. But ghosts had their uses. Ghosts could move through the world unnoticed. Ghosts could complete missions that the living were too afraid to attempt. And in 72 hours, that's exactly what Bryn Kessler intended to do. The C-17 Globemaster climbed through 25,000 feet over the black waters of the Mediterranean, its cargo bay dim and cold and filled with the particular silence that precedes violence. Four operators sat in jump seats along the starboard side, each sealed inside their own mental preparation rituals. Lieutenant Jackson Cole was checking and rechecking his breaching charges with the obsessive focus of someone who knew that the difference between a clean entry and a catastrophic failure was measured in fractions of ounces of C4. Sergeant First Class Harrison Reed had his eyes closed, lips moving slightly, as he ran through medical procedures that might be needed if things went wrong. Staff Sergeant Pierce Donovan sat motionless, his sniper rifle case between his knees, staring at nothing with the 1,000-yard gaze that belonged to people who'd spent too much time looking through scopes at things that needed to die. And at the front of the line closest to the jump door, Senior Chief Bryn Kessler sat with her hands resting on her thighs, breathing slowly, methodically, 6 breaths per minute. Her eyes were open but unfocused, her consciousness turned inward to that place where fear and doubt lived and had to be acknowledged before they could be set aside. She'd done this dance 47 times before. 47 combat missions, 47 times of stepping out of safety and into chaos, 47 occasions where death was not an abstract concept, but a tangible presence that could reach out and claim her if she made a single mistake. But this time felt different. This time she was team lead, operational control. 4 lives depended on her decisions, plus Meredith Harper's, plus her own. 6 people who would live or die based on whether her training held up under pressure, whether her instincts were as sharp as they needed to be, whether the universe decided that today was the day her luck finally ran out. Inside her plate carrier, pressed against her heart, her grandfather's trident radiated a warmth that was probably imaginary, but felt real enough. She touched it briefly through the fabric, a gesture that might have been superstition if she believed in such things. But she didn't believe in luck, or fate, or divine intervention. She believed in training. She believed in violence of action. She believed that the mission was everything and personal survival was just a pleasant side effect. The loadmaster's voice crackled through the cargo bay speakers. 2 minutes to jump, final check. The team rose as one, moving through pre-jump procedures with the synchronized precision of people who'd done this so many times it had become muscle memory. Oxygen masks secured. Altimeters checked. Parachute rigging inspected one final time because you couldn't fix a rigging problem at terminal velocity. Bryn caught Cole's eye and gave him a slight nod. He returned it, his face invisible behind the oxygen mask, but his body language communicating confidence. Good. Confidence was contagious. So was fear. As team lead, her emotional state would set the tone for everyone else. 30 seconds. Stand by. The ramp began to lower, and the roar of wind at altitude filled the cargo bay like the voice of some angry god. Beyond the ramp, there was only darkness and stars, and the vast indifference of space, looking down on the tiny drama of human beings about to throw themselves into the void. Bryn felt her heart rate tick up slightly. 62 beats per minute, still well within normal parameters. The fear was there, lurking at the edges of her consciousness, but it was manageable. Fear was just information. It told you that what you were about to do was dangerous. Ignoring it was stupid. Letting it control you was fatal. The trick was to acknowledge it and move forward anyway. Green light, go, go, go. Bryn stepped into the darkness. The free fall was peaceful in a way that combat never was. 90 seconds of nothing but wind and darkness, and the strange tranquility that came from surrendering to gravity. She tracked west, using her body as a wing, covering 2 horizontal miles while dropping 20,000 vertical feet. The GPS display on her wrist showed the landing zone approaching. 800 feet. Time to deploy. The chute opened with a violent jerk that would have been painful if she hadn't been expecting it. Suddenly, the roar of wind was replaced by an eerie silence, broken only by the whisper of fabric above her head. The ground below was invisible, just varying shades of black that her night vision goggles rendered in shades of green. She steered toward the designated landing zone, a patch of open desert 12 kilometers from the target, where the chance of compromise was acceptably low. Her boots hit sand, and she was already moving, collapsing the chute, gathering the fabric, preparing to bury it. The rest of the team landed within 30 seconds of each other, a textbook insertion that spoke to hundreds of hours of training. No words were exchanged. They'd rehearsed this so many times that communication was unnecessary. Four operators became a single organism, moving through the burial sequence and equipment redistribution with the efficiency of a machine. Bryn checked her watch. 2300 local time. 4 hours until they needed to be in position for the assault. 12 kilometers of hostile territory to cover on foot, moving slowly and carefully because speed without stealth was just a fast way to die. She pulled up the navigation data on her GPS, confirmed the route she'd memorized during the planning phase, and started walking. The desert at night was a study in contrasts. Beautiful and deadly, peaceful and hostile, vast enough to swallow armies, but intimate enough that a single misstep could echo for miles. Bryn moved through it like a ghost, hence the call sign, her footsteps placed with such care that they barely disturbed the sand. Behind her, the team maintained 15-meter spacing, far enough apart that a single IED or ambush couldn't take them all close enough that they could provide mutual support if things went wrong. 2 hours into the movement, Donovan's voice came through the radio, barely a whisper. Contact rear, 400 meters, 3 vehicles. The team went prone as one, melting into the sand like they'd never existed. Bryn activated her thermal imager and scanned behind them. 3 Toyota Hilux technical trucks, the preferred vehicle of insurgents and militias throughout the Middle East. They were moving slowly, searchlights sweeping the desert in a random pattern that suggested routine patrol rather than active pursuit. If the team stayed still and let them pass, there was a 90% chance they'd be missed. But 90% wasn't 100%, and in this business, the 10% would kill you just as dead. Bryn made a decision. Hold position. Weapons tight unless they stop. The vehicles approached close enough now that she could hear the engines and the voices of men talking in Arabic, discussing something mundane that had nothing to do with the 4 American operators lying invisible in the sand less than 100 meters away. The searchlights passed over their position twice, but the darkness and the minimal thermal signature of their gear rendered them effectively invisible. The trucks continued on, eventually disappearing into the night. Resume movement. Bryn's voice was steady, betraying none of the adrenaline that was coursing through her system. Close calls were part of the job. You acknowledged them and moved on because dwelling on what might have happened was a luxury that got people killed. By 0300, they were in position. The target compound sat 800 meters away, rendered in stark detail through their night vision and thermal optics. Bryn counted 19 visible fighters, close to the lower end of the intelligence estimate. The compound itself was exactly as the satellite imagery had shown: 4 main buildings arranged around a central courtyard, guard posts. At the north and east corners, a single gate on the south side that was nominally guarded, but the guard appeared to be asleep. Donovan set up his sniper hide on a low rise that gave him clear lines of sight to most of the compound. His Mk13 rifle, chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, could reach out and touch targets at distances that would have been considered impossible a generation ago. More importantly, with the suppressor attached, it could do so quietly enough that people 300 meters away wouldn't necessarily know they were being shot at. Long shot in position, Donovan reported. I have eyes on primary structure. Second floor west side. Single window with bars. Thermal signature consistent with 1 person, minimal movement. Probable location for our package. Meredith Harper. Still alive, still waiting for rescue or death, whichever came first. Bryn felt something stir in her chest, something that might have been relief or determination, or just the cold satisfaction of a plan coming together. But there was no time for emotion. The mission was entering its critical phase. Ghost copies, stand by for infiltration. Bryn began stripping off her tactical gear, removing everything that screamed American military operator, and replacing it with the traditional dress she'd carried in her pack. The abaya and hijab were both authentic, purchased from a market in Erbil by an intelligence asset and aged appropriately to look like they'd been worn for years rather than hours. Underneath, she kept her Glock 19 3 spare magazines and her grandfather's Ka bar knife. Everything else stayed behind with the team. Cole's voice came through the radio, concern evident even in a whisper. Ghost, you're sure about this negative Reaper? I'm not sure about anything, but it's the plan, and the plan is all we've got. She finished adjusting her disguise, checking her reflection in a small mirror to ensure everything looked right. I move in 3 minutes. On my signal, you breach. Copy. 3 IR flashes means go. Bryn took a moment to center herself, running through the plan one final time. Approach as an elderly woman, gain access to the female workers section, locate Harper. Eliminate any immediate threats, signal the team, and hold position until they arrived. Simple in concept, catastrophically dangerous in execution. But danger was the job. Danger was what separated operators from everyone else. She started walking toward the compound, her gait altered to mimic an old woman's shuffle, her posture hunched and submissive. It was a performance that would have made professional actors jealous, and it was born from hundreds of hours of training in SARE school, where they taught you that the best survival strategy was often to become invisible by meeting expectations. People saw what they expected to see. An elderly woman in traditional dress moving slowly through the night was not a threat. She was scenery. The guard at the south gate looked up as she approached, his AK-47 coming up slightly, but not quite pointing at her. In Arabic, he called out, "Who's there?" Bryn responded in the same language, her accent carefully modulated to match the local dialect. "Please, I need to speak to my son. He works here. I have news from his family." The guard approached, suspicious but not alarmed. That was the moment of maximum danger. If he got close enough to see through the disguise, if he noticed her hands were too smooth or her eyes were too alert, the entire mission would collapse into violence before it was supposed to. But he stayed at about 10 feet just outside the range where she could reliably reach him with the knife. "No one comes in at night. Come back in the morning. Please, it's important. His father is dying. He needs to know." The guard hesitated, and Bryn could see the internal debate playing out on his face. Compassion versus duty. In the end, compassion won, as it often did among men who weren't quite hardened enough for the life they'd chosen. He lowered his rifle and waved her forward. "Quickly, kitchen entrance only. Don't go anywhere else." She shuffled past him, head bowed in grateful submission, and the moment she was out of his line of sight, her entire demeanor changed. The shuffle became a glide, silent and purposeful. The hunched posture straightened. The submissive old woman disappeared, and in her place was a weapon moving through hostile territory with lethal intent. The kitchen entrance was unguarded, as intelligence had suggested. She slipped inside, her eyes adjusting to the dim interior lighting. 2 women were present, local civilians who'd been conscripted as forced labor, their faces showing the particular exhaustion that came from living under constant threat. They looked up as Bryn entered, and their eyes widened with fear. Bryn moved close, keeping her voice low. "Where is the American woman?" One of them pointed toward the ceiling. "Second floor, locked room, 2 guards. Stay here, stay quiet. If you hear shooting, hide." The women nodded frantically, and Bryn could see the hope dawning in their eyes. Help had come. The cavalry had arrived. She wanted to reassure them, to promise that they'd all be safe, but she'd learned long ago not to make promises she couldn't guarantee. All she could do was complete the mission and hope that collateral salvation came along for the ride. The stairs were stone, which meant they wouldn't creak, but they were also uncarpeted, which meant her footsteps might echo if she wasn't careful. She ascended slowly, testing each step before committing her full weight, moving with the patience of someone who understood that speed was often the enemy of stealth. At the top of the stairs, she could hear voices, 2 men arguing about something trivial, their attention focused on each other rather than on security. Perfect. She came around the corner low and fast. The first guard saw her and had just enough time to register confusion. An old woman shouldn't move like that, before her knife opened his throat in a single fluid motion. She caught his body as it fell, lowering it silently while her left hand was already reaching for the second guard. He was turning, his AK-47 coming up, mouth opening to shout a warning. Her hand clamped over his face, fingers digging into pressure points that made his muscles seize. The knife came up under his ribs, angled toward the heart, a killing blow that her grandfather had taught her when she was 15, and he'd decided she was old enough to learn the really serious techniques. 2 bodies, 3 seconds, 0 noise beyond a few muffled grunts. Bryn lowered the second guard and paused to listen. No alarm, no shouting. The compound continued its normal, nighttime rhythm, blissfully unaware that death had just walked through its corridors. The locked door was a standard commercial model, cheap and easy to pick. Bryn had it open in under 30 seconds. Beyond it, a small room with a single barred window and a woman curled on a thin mattress, her body skeletal from malnutrition, her face turned to the wall in the posture of someone who'd given up hope. Meredith Harper. The woman's head turned slowly, her eyes taking a moment to focus. When they did, they filled with tears. "Who? I'm West Navy. You're going home." Bryn pulled off the hijab, revealing her face. "Stay behind me and do exactly what I say." Harper tried to stand and nearly collapsed. Bryn caught her feeling the fragility of a body that had been systematically broken down by captivity. This was going to complicate the extraction. A mobile package could run, an immobile one had to be carried. That changed everything. But that was a problem for later. Right now, she needed to signal the team. She moved to the window, pulled out her infrared strobe, and flashed it 3 times. 800 meters away, Lieutenant Cole would be seeing those flashes and initiating the breach. They had maybe 2 minutes before the compound erupted into chaos. Bryn was helping Harper toward the door when she heard the click. It was a small sound, almost innocent, the kind of thing you might dismiss as the settling of an old building. But she'd spent enough time in Iraq to know that sound. She knew it like she knew her own heartbeat. "Pressure plate mine. Don't move." Her voice was a whip crack, freezing Harper mid-step. She knelt, examining the floor, and saw it immediately. A loose board, and beneath it the unmistakable outline of an improvised explosive device. Someone had booby-trapped the hostage room, either as insurance against escape or as a final act of spite if rescue came. The pressure plate was already depressed, which meant they had 3 seconds from the moment Harper's weight came off it. 3 seconds to get clear of the blast radius. 3 seconds to make a decision that would determine whether they both lived or both died. Bryn didn't hesitate. She grabbed Harper and threw her toward the door with every ounce of strength she possessed. Harper sailed through the opening and crashed into the hallway, her scream of pain and confusion immediately drowned out by the thunderous roar of the explosion. Bryn tried to follow, but the shockwave caught her mid-leap, slamming her against the far wall with enough force to crack ribs and turn her vision gray at the edges. She fell into rubble debris raining down around her. Her left arm was pinned under approximately 300 pounds of concrete, and the pain that radiated from it was the kind that told her bones were broken in multiple places. For a moment, she considered the very real possibility that this was how it ended. Buried alive in a collapsing building in Iraq mission, incomplete promise to her grandfather unfulfilled. But then she heard it, the sound of gunfire. The team breaching, Cole and Reed and Donovan doing their jobs, moving toward her position, and they'd be expecting her to have done her job too. They'd be expecting her to have secured the package and be ready to move. Bryn assessed her situation with the cold pragmatism that had kept her alive through 47 previous missions. Left arm broken, pinned useless. Right arm functional. Both legs mobile. Glock 19 still holstered. 3 magazines. Approximately 50 rounds total. And based on the shouting she could hear through the ringing in her ears, at least 8 hostile fighters converging in on her position. The math was simple and brutal. She couldn't move. She couldn't retreat. All she could do was hold this position long enough for the team to extract Harper and get clear. After that, if there was an after that, they could come back for her. But Harper was the mission. Harper had to survive. Everything else was negotiable. She keyed her radio with her right hand. "Ghost to all elements. I'm compromised. Package is mobile, moving toward you. I'm pinned, will cover." Cole's response was immediate and predictable. "Negative, Ghost. We're coming to you." "That's an order, Lieutenant. Get Harper out. I'll hold here. We don't leave people behind." "You're not leaving me behind. You're completing the mission." Her voice was steel, the voice of someone who would not be argued with. "Harper goes home. That's all that matters. Now move." The first hostile fighter appeared in the doorway, his AK-47 sweeping the smoke-filled room. Bryn shot him twice in the chest from 15 feet, the suppressed Glock barely louder than a cough. He went down, and she was already transitioning to the second target, a younger fighter who'd been following too close behind his partner. 1 round to the head, a lucky shot through the smoke that was more instinct than aim. 2 dead, 48 rounds remaining. More shouting, more footsteps. They knew where she was now and they were coming. Bryn used her functional hand to drag herself slightly to the left, finding a better position behind a collapsed section of wall that would provide some cover. The pain from her broken arm was extraordinary, the kind of thing that would have had most people screaming or passing out. But she'd been hurt before. Pain was just information. You could choose what to do with that information. 3 more fighters rushed the doorway, and this time they were using actual fire and maneuver tactics, one suppressing, while the other 2 tried to flank. Bryn waited until they committed to their movement, then fired 4 rapid shots. The suppressing firefighter took 2 to the chest and dropped. One of the flankers caught a round through the shoulder and fell back screaming. The third made it into the room and took cover behind an overturned table. Bryn changed magazines, the motion awkward with only one functional hand, but manageable. 34 rounds remaining. She could hear Cole's voice in her radio arguing with her, but she'd stopped listening. The bubble of combat had descended that strange state of consciousness, where time dilated and everything outside the immediate threat ceased to exist. There was only the room, the rubble, the angles and distances, and the mathematical certainty that more men were coming than she had bullets to stop them. A grenade bounced through the doorway, the distinctive Soviet RGD-5 pattern that insurgents loved because they were cheap and plentiful and reliably deadly. It landed maybe 8 feet from her position, and in the fraction of a second available to react, Bryn made a choice that was pure instinct and absolute insanity. She kicked it. Her right leg lashed out, boot connecting with the grenade, sending it skittering back toward the doorway where it had originated. The explosion was immediate and catastrophic, turning the hallway into a kill zone. She heard screaming, smelled the distinctive copper and cordite scent of fresh death, and through the smoke saw at least 2 bodies down. But the explosion had also brought more of the ceiling down, and now she was even more trapped. The rubble shifted in a way that made extraction without heavy equipment nearly impossible. Her radio crackled again, and this time it was Donovan's voice, calm and professional, despite what he was saying. "Ghost, I have visual on your position. Building is structurally compromised. You need to move now or you're not coming out. Can't move long shot, pinned and taking contact. How many?" "Started with 13, down to maybe 6, but they're getting smarter." A pause, then "I'm coming to you." "Negative, stay on overwatch, I need your eyes." What she needed was her entire left side to stop feeling like it was on fire, but that wasn't happening anytime soon. Another fighter appeared, this one more cautious, using the doorframe for cover and firing blind around the corner. Bryn waited for him to expose himself to reload and put a single round through his head when he leaned out to check his work. 7 dead, 27 rounds remaining. The math was getting worse. She was running out of ammunition faster than they were running out of fighters, and eventually the equation would flip from manageable to fatal. But she'd bought time. Cole's last transmission had indicated they were 200 meters from the compound with Harper, which meant the primary mission objective was secured. Everything after that was just whether she personally made it home. She'd always known this day might come. Every operator did. You couldn't spend years running into burning buildings and not understand that eventually the law of averages would catch up. What surprised her was how calm she felt about it. Not resigned exactly, more like accepting. If this was her last stand, at least it was for something that mattered. At least Meredith Harper would go home to whatever family was waiting for her. At least the mission would be complete. The next attack came from multiple angles simultaneously, a coordinated push that spoke to either professional training or desperate circumstance. Bryn fired methodically, picking targets by threat priority, her training taking over completely now that conscious thought had become more liability than asset. She emptied her second magazine, changed to her third and final one, and tried not to think about what would happen when these 17 rounds were gone. And then through the smoke and chaos, she heard something that shouldn't have been there. Footsteps behind her. American voices. Cole and Reed, having completely disregarded her direct orders, were in the room and moving toward her position. "God damn it, I told you." "Shut up, Chief. We're getting you out." Boo. Cole was already working on the rubble, pinning her arm, while Reed provided security at the door. "We don't leave people behind. Reaper taught us that." The mention of Finn Gallagher's call sign hit her like a physical blow. Finn who'd taken a bullet meant for her. Finn who'd died because he refused to leave her behind. And now these men were risking the same fate because they'd learned the same lesson. Harper. Secure with a long shot 200 meters out, waiting for us. Cole grunted as he shifted a particularly heavy piece of concrete. This is gonna hurt, Chief. Everything already hurts. Just do it. He pulled and her arm came free, and the pain that followed was transcendent, the kind that made everything else in her life seem trivial by comparison. But she was mobile. That was all that mattered. Reed slung her right arm over his shoulder, taking most of her weight, while Cole provided security. They moved toward the door as a unit, and Bryn used her remaining strength to keep her Glock up and ready, because she'd be damned if she was going to be carried out of a firefight without at least being able to contribute to her own survival. They made it to the hallway just as the remaining fighters mounted one final assault. The firefight that followed was brief and brutal, the kind of close-quarters violence that would give everyone involved nightmares for years. When the smoke cleared, 3 more fighters were down, and the Americans were somehow still standing, though Reed had taken a round to his plate carrier that would leave a bruise the size of a dinner plate. The extraction was a blur of pain and motion, and the surreal relief that came from realizing she was going to survive after all. They linked up with Donovan and Harper, and the 5 of them moved as fast as Harper's weakened condition allowed, putting distance between themselves and the compound that was now fully alert and thoroughly pissed off. The drive to the forward operating base took 20 minutes that felt like 20 hours. Bryn spent most of it fading in and out of consciousness, her body finally acknowledging the damage it had sustained now that the immediate crisis was over. She was dimly aware of Reed working on her arm, setting the bone, administering morphine that turned the pain from unbearable to merely agonizing. Harper was crying, saying something about gratitude and bravery and things that Bryn couldn't quite process through the fog of drugs and exhaustion. The last thing she heard before losing consciousness entirely was Cole's voice speaking into his radio. Shepard's crook is complete, package secure. 1 friendly wounded ambulatory, requesting medevac priority 2. And then there was nothing but darkness and the ghost of her grandfather's voice saying, "I'm proud of you, kid. You did good." The white room was too bright, the kind of institutional lighting that made it impossible to tell what time of day it was or how long you'd been unconscious. Bryn's first conscious thought was that she was alive, which was surprising. Her second was that her left arm hurt with a profound intensity that suggested significant medical intervention. Her third was that someone was sitting in the chair beside her bed, and when she turned her head, she found herself looking at Master Chief Wyatt Drummond. "You're awake." His voice was rough, and his eyes were red. "About damn time. You've been out for 36 hours. Harper. Stateside already. Her family is flying in to meet her. She's going to be fine thanks to you. The team. Everyone came home. Reed's got a bruise that looks like someone hit him with a truck, but otherwise clean sweep." Drummond leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Chief, what you did out there, I was doing my job." "Bullshit. Your job doesn't require fighting off 12 hostiles while pinned under rubble with a broken arm. That's not competence, kid. That's something else entirely." Bryn was too tired to argue. Instead, she asked the question that had been lurking at the edges of her consciousness. "My arm. Broken in 3 places. They had to pin it. You'll heal, but it's going to take time. 3 months minimum before you're operational again." He paused. "Admiral Stokes was here earlier. She said to tell you that the president wants to award you the Medal of Honor." The words didn't quite register at first. When they did, Bryn's first response was confusion. For what? For extraordinary heroism, for saving an American civilian while wounded, for killing 12 enemy combatants in a last stand that's going to be studied in tactics courses for the next 50 years, for being exactly the kind of warrior this country needs. Drummond pulled something from his pocket. Her grandfather's trident still pinned to the piece of plate carrier fabric it had been attached to during the mission. It was blood-covered, scorched from the explosion, but intact. "You brought him home, just like I told you to." Bryn took it carefully, feeling the weight of 40 years of history in her palm. "Finn Gallagher should get it too." "He is. Posthumous. You'll stand for him at the ceremony." Drummond's voice cracked slightly. "Your grandfather would be so proud. Hell, I'm proud. You did something today that most people couldn't even imagine doing. I was just... If you say you were just doing your job one more time, I'm going to hit you with my cane. which I'm definitely getting after this conversation because I'm too old for this level of stress. But he was smiling and his hand rested briefly on her shoulder. Rest, kid, you earned it. The ceremony at the White House 4 months later was surreal in a way that combat never was. Combat made sense. Combat had rules even if they were brutal ones. This was all pomp and pageantry, and politicians using her story for their own purposes. She endured it because she had to standing at attention in her dress blues, while the president read a citation that made her sound like a superhero rather than a woman who'd simply refused to quit when quitting would have been easier. Finn Gallagher's mother received his medal first, and Bryn stood beside her, tears streaming down her face for the first time in years. Mrs. Gallagher, who barely reached Bryn's shoulder, hugged her afterward and whispered, "He loved you like a sister. Thank you for being worth dying for." When it was Bryn's turn, when the medal was placed around her neck and the crowd applauded, she thought about her grandfather, about Finn, about all the ghosts who'd gotten her to this moment. And when she was asked to say a few words, she approached the microphone and spoke the only truth she knew. "My grandfather taught me three things. First, silence is the sniper's hymn. Let your actions be your voice. Second, the mission is everything. Ego is nothing. Third, never leave your people behind. Ever." She paused, looking directly at the camera. "I have nothing else to say except this. To every woman who thinks she doesn't belong in the arena, you do, but you must earn it. Not with words, with work. To every person who doubts you, prove them wrong, quietly." She stepped back, saluted the president, and walked off. The speech lasted 52 seconds, the shortest Medal of Honor acceptance in recorded history, and it was replayed on every news network for the next week, dissected and analyzed, and turned into exactly the kind of symbol she'd never wanted to become. 6 months later, she was back at Coronado this time as a senior chief and the first female BUDS instructor. The student is assembled on Kessler Circle, now officially named the sign carved in stone and brass, and she addressed them with the same directness she brought to everything. "I'm Senior Chief Kessler. I'm your CQB instructor. I have one rule: results matter. Everything else is noise. I don't care about your gender, your background, your politics, or your feelings. I care about three things. Can you shoot? Can you move? Can you complete the mission when everything goes wrong? If yes, you'll graduate. If no, you'll fail, and you should." Among the faces staring back at her was Seaman Riley Sutton, the young woman who'd asked for advice months ago. Bryn caught her eye and gave a slight nod. Not encouragement exactly, more like acknowledgement. The girl had shown up. That counted for something. That evening, alone on the beach where she'd spent so many mornings running in the dark, Bryn sat with three objects laid out before her. Her grandfather's Polaroid from Grenada, Finn Gallagher's photo with its inscription about carrying the mission, and her Medal of Honor still in its presentation case. "I did what you taught me," she said to the ghosts. "Now I'll teach them." The ocean rolled in indifferent and eternal, and somewhere out there in the dark, the next generation of warriors was preparing for battles not yet imagined. Some of them would be women. Some of them would be trained by Bryn Kessler. And all of them would carry forward a legacy that had been built on silence, competence, and the unwavering belief that excellence was the only standard that mattered. Master Chief Wyatt Drummond, watching from a distance, smiled to himself. Flint Kessler had taught his granddaughter well. She'd become exactly what the world needed: a warrior who let her actions define her, who understood that true strength didn't need to announce itself, who knew that the only voice that mattered was the voice of results. "She's ready," he muttered to the night. "They all are." And in the years that followed, when historians look back at this moment in military history, they would point to Bryn Kessler as the woman who changed everything. Not through activism or politics or loud demands for recognition, but through the simple, devastating act of being undeniably excellent at the only job that mattered, keeping her people alive and completing the mission no matter the conditions. The silent storm had passed through Coronado, leaving transformation in its wake, and the world, whether it was ready or not, would never be quite the same.